I'm going to tell you the reason Jesus spoke in parables, and I'll warn you now, it's not the reason you were taught in Sunday school. The easy answer is, he used simple stories so simple people could understand. But Jesus said something almost the opposite, and once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Hold on. The opposite. I've heard my whole life that parables were meant to make things clear. You're telling me that's wrong?
I'm telling you it's half the picture. Sit with me on this because the other half is where it gets real. After Jesus tells the parable of the sower, the disciples come up and basically ask, "Why are you talking in riddles?" And his answer, in Mark chapter 4, stops you cold. He says he speaks in parables so that seeing they may not see and hearing they may not understand.
Wait, that sounds harsh, almost like he wanted some people to miss it. That bothers me, honestly.
Good. Let it bother you, because that discomfort is the doorway. Don't rush past it. Here's what most people miss about the world Jesus was standing in. First century Galilee wasn't a place of books and lectures. Most people couldn't read, and scrolls were rare and expensive. It was an oral culture. Farmers, fishermen, shepherds. Stories were how truth traveled from one generation to the next. And there was already a Jewish teaching form for exactly this. The rabbis called it a mashal, a riddle story meant to make you wrestle, not just nod along. So when Jesus told a story about seed and soil, his listeners weren't getting a watered-down lesson for slow learners. They were being handed a puzzle on purpose by a teacher working inside a tradition they already recognized.
Okay, but why a puzzle? Why not just say the thing plainly and get it over with?
Because a statement you can argue with, a story you have to walk into. Think about it. If a prophet marches up to you and says you are a greedy man, you get defensive in half a second. The walls go up. But the prophet Nathan once told King David a little story about a rich man who stole a poor man's only lamb. And David got furious at the man in the story. He demanded justice. And only then did Nathan turn to him and say, "You are the man." The story got past the guards at the door of his heart. By the time David realized it was about him, the truth was already inside. That's what a parable does. It disarms you before you can defend yourself.
That's exactly how it's worked on me. I can sit through a whole sermon and feel nothing, arms crossed. But a story about a father running down the road to a son who wasted everything, that one undoes me every single time. I don't argue with it. I just break.
The way I see it, that's the whole design. A parable slips under the radar. And now go back to that hard saying, because it finally makes sense. Jesus isn't hiding truth to be cruel. He's separating the curious from the committed. The parable is a filter. The person who only wants entertainment hears a nice farming story, nods, and walks off satisfied. But the person who's actually hungry, they stay. They linger. They ask, what did that mean? And here's the detail people skip right over. To the ones who stayed and asked, Jesus explained everything in private. The concealing and the revealing are the same act. The riddle keeps out the casual and lets in the hungry.
So the parable isn't the answer. It's a test of whether you'll come closer.
Now you've got it. A parable is a door that only opens from the inside.
But hang on. If he explained them privately to the disciples, doesn't that just prove the regular crowds were being left in the dark on purpose? That still feels unfair.
I hear you, and that's the right question to push on. But look at who got the explanation. It wasn't the smartest in the room. It wasn't the religious experts. Half of them were standing there trying to trap him. The ones who got the private explanation were the ones who followed him back to where he was staying and said, "We don't get it. Teach us." The door wasn't locked against the crowd. It was opened by anyone willing to knock. The experts had every advantage and stayed outside because they were sure they already knew. The fishermen had nothing but hunger, and they got the kingdom explained to them at the dinner table.
That actually flips it for me. It's not that the truth was kept from the humble, it's that the proud locked themselves out.
Every time. Pride is the one thing a parable can't get past because pride won't ask the question. And there's another layer here I don't want you to miss because it tells you something about the heart of God. Take the parable of the wheat and the weeds. A man plants good seed, an enemy sneaks in and sows weeds among it, and the servants want to rip the weeds out right now. And the owner says, "No, wait. If you tear them out now, you'll uproot the wheat with them. Wait for the harvest." Now, why tell that as a story instead of a doctrine? Because if Jesus had just declared, "God is patient with evil for a while," you'd have nodded and forgotten it by lunch. But as a story, it gets under your skin. It makes you feel the tension, the ache of watching the weeds grow and wanting them gone now. The parable doesn't just teach you that God is patient. It makes you sit in the discomfort of his patience.
So the form of the teaching is part of the teaching itself.
That's it exactly. The how is part of the what. You don't just learn the lesson, you experience it. And here's why this matters for you right now in 2026. We live drowning in clear, loud, instant content. Everything is explained to us in 15 seconds, spoon-fed, optimized, so we never have to think for ourselves. We get the conclusion without the journey, and we are starving anyway. Have you noticed that? More answers than any generation in history, and less wisdom. Jesus refused to play that game. He trusted you with a puzzle because he respected you enough to make you reach for it. The truths that actually change a human being are almost never the ones handed to you cheap. They're the ones you had to chase down, the ones that cost you something to understand.
That's convicting, because I do want everything instant. I want the verse, the answer, the feeling, right now, no waiting. And I think that's exactly why so much of it doesn't stick. It goes in and right back out.
It doesn't stick because it didn't cost you anything to get it. Think back to that very first parable. The seed that lands on the hard path gets snatched away by birds before it ever sinks in. The seed in shallow soil springs up fast and dies just as fast because it had no roots. That was the sower. And here's the thing that should stop you cold.
Wait, so the parable of the sower is a parable about how people hear parables?
Yeah. Let that sit for a second. The very first story Jesus explains is the story about whether you're really listening at all. It's the parable about parables. He's standing there asking before he says anything else, "What kind of soil are you?" When the word lands on you, does it get snatched, scorched, choked, or does it take root?
That's the part that gets me, because the same word, the same seed, lands on everybody. The difference was never the seed, it was the soil.
The difference was always the soil. And that's the most hopeful thing in the whole teaching, because soil can change. You are not stuck as the hard path. You can be broken up. You can be cleared of the thorns. That's what repentance is. It's letting the ground of your heart get turned over so the next seed can actually root. And do you remember how Jesus ended so many of these stories? He'd say, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." Strange thing to say to a crowd that obviously had ears. But he wasn't talking about the ears on the side of your head. He was talking about whether you're willing to truly listen, to let it land and change you. That little phrase was the handle on the door. He was telling them right out loud, there's more here than the story. Reach for it. So here's what I want to leave you with. The next time you read one of these stories and it doesn't quite click, don't reach for somebody else's explanation right away. Sit in the discomfort, wrestle with it, ask the question out loud, because the wrestling is the point. That's the door opening from the inside. Jesus didn't speak in parables to keep you out. He spoke in parables to see if you'd come in. The only people who ever stayed outside were the ones too proud to knock. If a line in this made you stop and think, drop the word hungry in the comments. I read them, and I want to know it reached you. If you know someone who's been spoon-fed faith their whole life and is still starving, send them this one. It might be the thing that turns their soil over. And if you want to keep wrestling with these stories together, subscribe and we'll keep digging.